welcome back. We took a little bit of a break, but we are excited to be kicking off a new season, season three of Film to Table. And we had so much fun with some special guests in the last two seasons that we thought it would make for a good premiere if we brought a prominent and knowledgeable film. What do you want to be known as?
Theorist, film
Theorist?
theorist.
Ooh,
Oh,
I
I
like
like
this.
that. We're bringing on Laura and Dom's friend Matt.
But yeah, it's great to be here. Excited to talk about these two movies. Honored to be on.
Laura, why don't you kind of set us up with why we chose these two movies?
So, Matt actually gave me the idea for these two movies to match up, and that's why I picked it. So, I'm actually going to throw it to Matt, and Matt, you can explain why you think these movies are a good match.
Sure. So these two, I kind of view these as like a parent and child of movies. They're not like cousins. They're more of like When Harry Met Sally. It's dated. It's from a different generation. Still relevant in some ways, but it's definitely when you watch it, you're watching a classic. Whereas Worst Person in the World feels like a friend you just made while traveling abroad, right? It's a very relevant movie. It feels like it's happening in the moment that you're watching it. And that's pretty rare for film and TV, that something you're watching just feels like it's like euphoria. It's made of the moment you're living in. But the connection between them two is seemingly somewhat obvious to me, right? It's two people who come in and out of each other's lives over long periods of time. And the scenes are kind of set up like a long series of mini stories or shorts, right? It's a lot of short scenes. It's almost like New Yorker magazine length of scenes in each. And the structure is very similar. They both begin with a transformational moment in each character's lives. And they both have characters that are both easy to love and easy to get annoyed with, which makes them feel all four of the main characters in both films are very real and authentic.
Do we each want to maybe give a little bit of a background as to our experience with watching these movies? I'll kick things off. I don't remember the first time I saw When Harry Met Sally. I think that I may have seen it years ago, but it didn't stick, which is interesting because now I consider it to be in my top, maybe like my top 15 favorite movies. And it is very much, it has all the ingredients for what makes the type of movie that I love. It has that really good, witty writing. It's a movie that, I would say, in the last maybe like 6 or 7 years, I've watched like more and more and more frequently. Every time I watch it, fall a little bit more in love with it.
I mean, to interrupt you there,
Yeah.
it's kind of funny that you say that because that's the core of When Harry Met Sally, right? They meet and there's no romantic connection at all, right? They forget each other and then they don't see each other for like 8 years. And it's not until they're kind of just keep coming across this person that it grows on them. It's funny that like your experience with the movie is kind of like what's happening inside of the movie itself.
Wow. Great, great point. So maybe you can draw a parallel for Worst Person in the World with my experience with watching that. I was first introduced to the film through Laura. I remember her saying, I saw this movie. It's so good. You have to see it. I saw that it won all the awards. So I'm like, yeah, I'm definitely going to like make a point to see this. And I was in Nashville over the summer and my husband was there for an event. So I kind of had the day to myself. So I'm like, this is going to be the perfect time. I'm going to watch this movie. I'm going to watch The Worst Person in the World. And I agree that I thought it was a fantastic movie, but I was depressed for like weeks afterwards. And I don't even think I like told Laura that I watched it. I think because I was just left feeling so sad that I didn't even want to talk about it. I don't think I told anyone that I watched it actually now that I'm thinking about it. I didn't tell my husband. So it's kind of, I don't know if there's a parallel here, but it was like my like secret sorrow. So for this podcast recording, I rewatched When Harry Met Sally 2 nights ago. I did not rewatch The Worst Person in the World because I kept trying to like hype myself up, but I was like, I can't put myself through it again to watch it. So in preparation, instead, I listened to a bunch of podcasts about it, and I just reread through the synopsis. But I was telling Laura that watching that movie to me was the equivalent of another experience I had over the summer, which is this new ride just came out at Epcot. It's like the Guardians of the Galaxy ride. It's like the newest, hottest ride at Disney. I went on it and it was fantastic. Best ride that I've ever been on. Very innovative, very entertaining, but I felt so sick afterwards. Like I couldn't do anything like the rest of the day, that I will never go on that ride again. But I like highly recommend it. So The Worst Person in the World I would put in that exact same category. I highly recommend that everyone watch it. It's well done. It's a really compelling story. It's a really relatable story, but maybe I'm being overly sensitive about it, but I tend to be kind of sensitive about things that like kind of hit me in the right spot, and this movie did that for me. So
Yeah, I mean, the way you describe that sounds how a lot of people describe David Lynch movies. Of the first time they watch it, they're so moved and captivated by it, but it's typically really dark and subjects that hit home, or they're buried within us, or they're subconscious thoughts that we've had before. And so they love it the first time, but they need to take like 10 years before they can revisit it because it's just too raw feeling, or it's just hitting too close to home, even if it's not the story of your life, which hopefully David Lynch movies are not. But there's just some aspect of it that is like buried underneath our skin. Yeah, and this movie's interesting because I think it had the same thing for me, but it was like the joyous aspects or the liberating aspects, the freedom aspects of the film, versus there's a lot of like heartbreak in it and a lot of fear buried in the film. Fear of dying and fear of what comes next in both a relationship and life and being alone.
And Matt, what about Harry Met Sally for you? Because this is on your top 10, right?
So I actually think both crack my top 10. When Harry Met Sally's been on my top 10 probably since I've had a top 10. I think I first came about it when I was like 8 or 10, and I discovered the IMDb 250 list, which I actually just went back today to see if it's still there, and I'm like kind of shocked. The movies that are on there when Harry Met Sally is no longer on the 250 list is like egregious to me that any 250 list of movies wouldn't have when Harry Met Sally. It's kind of been a Thanksgiving kind of movie, the same way that It's a Wonderful Life is always watched around Christmas. When Harry Met Sally is always watched in the fall for me. Hot tea, cozy movie.
that's funny because I have started in recent years watching it on New Year's Eve. It's become my New Year's Eve movie.
Yeah, for me, I watched it for the first time actually as a COVID movie when I was kind of just plowing through a bunch of movies and we couldn't go outside. And I remember liking it, but I have to say this doesn't make like my top 10 just because I think because I like so many Nora Ephron-esque movies that, and I just like them more than this one, but I still have a soft spot for this type of writing and the charm of it all, I guess. And, I haven't seen too many Billy Crystal movies, but I just think he's really great in this. And I don't know, like I'm not attracted to him, but I am attracted to him in this movie weirdly. So like I get the appeal, which I feel like is kind of a lot of the point of the movie. And then for Worst Person in the World, I mean, it's funny. I watched this 2 nights ago. It is only my second time watching it. So the first time I saw it, I had like a liberating experience because I saw it in the movies and I got to see a Q&A with the director and Renee. They were on Zoom, but Paul Thomas Anderson moderated it in person. Obviously, so many scenes are absolutely heartbreaking. They just like cut you to the core, but I found myself smiling probably 90% of it just because I'm in love with the way that it's shot. I love the complexity of the characters. I love the writing. I truly, this has become like my favorite movie. And I was a little nervous to rewatch it this week because I didn't know if it was going to stick as much as it did the first time. And I'm happy to say that I love it even more. It actually was better the second time I watched it because I was able to pick up on a lot more things that I enjoyed about it. I think the first half just completely sucks me in, and I honestly could rewatch it again this week.
Yeah, it's an
Makes
interesting
sense.
difference
Yeah.
between the two is like when Harry Met Sally is extremely balanced. Like the scenes are probably all the same length, tone, like you get kind of an equal vibe and it feels like you're just going through one year even though it takes place over 20, but it's very balanced throughout. Where Worst Person, I think I don't know the exact timeline of the events, but I think it takes place from like senior year of college to when she's about 30, roughly like 10 years maybe. It feels kind of like that length, and the weight or the speed of the film is like totally off kilter, right? And it's kind of like real life. Like the first half of the film is like your early 20s where everything's changing all the time, and then the second half of the film is like, okay, wait, what am I doing with my life? Some things matter a little bit more than others, and like it slows down. It's kind of like The Irishman, where the first half is very Martin Scorsese, and the second half is very like heavy, no music. I think that was like super intentional from the directors. Like every scene's a little bit longer, every piece of dialogue matters more. It's less fun and thrilling, and it is kind of like your memories of your 20s, and that's what I think one of the why it resonates so well is it feels like you're just rewatching someone's like recollection of their whole 20s.
Like you could say Worst Person in the World doesn't really have a plot because it's just kind of like it's just kind of showing her whole life between this time period and like you said a lot of the relationships that she has. But I think being 29, I can resonate in so many ways with both Sally and Julie, kind of watching them go through their early like struggles of like, oh, I need to be in a relationship, or just kind of like pressures of seeing what all your friends are doing or things like that. And it's just a lot of those things held up really well, I would say, for Sally's character. But they're just kind of like universally understood things that I think everyone has gone through at some point. And then like tying back to Julie, which is, I think there's not really like an exact time period, but it's definitely supposed to be like more modern day, that I feel like they were going through a lot of the same things. So it's just interesting to see like the gap of time that's happened between both of these movies, yet a lot of the experiences that women and men have really not changed over the course of time.
I'm very curious to hear Matt's take on this, but I'm intrigued that you are comparing Julie and Sally, because that was my initial thought. Like when you pitched recording with these two movies together in a podcast, I thought, oh, each story has a woman who is, you know, kind of going through this period of life and being like a young woman and kind of like growing into her 30s and trying to figure things out. But from the first like 5 minutes of rewatching When Harry Met Sally, one of Sally's very first lines is, "I have it all figured out." And in that way, I think that she's actually the opposite of Julie. And then I started, so from the beginning of rewatching it, I thought, okay, Laura must not have been talking about Sally. She must have been talking about Harry. So for the rest of watching When Harry Met Sally the other night, I was watching it through the lens of comparing Harry and Julie, because I felt like he was a lot more like her in that he wasn't ever really willing to face his feelings. I think that he was a lot more angsty in the way that Julie is. Happiness was kind of there for him all along, but he was unwilling to accept it.
Back to my other comment, I don't think that the two of them are similar. I think it's just more so the themes of like this time period, and there's just a lot of pressure tied to it. So like, yes, Sally, I mean, she couldn't be more different from Julie, but she is still like just in this kind of like weird limbo where she doesn't really know what's next. I mean, we haven't gotten to favorite lines, but I absolutely love when she says, "And I'm gonna be 40." And he's like, "When?" And she's like, someday.
It's like in
And I
8
feel
years.
like kind of the looming feeling of being in your 20s and being in your 30s of like, oh my God, this next decade is coming and I haven't checked this off my list. And I think Julie is so, she wants to hold on to her youth so badly and she's not willing, like she has all these desires to be a little bit more like adventurous and not be tied down. And she like is so hard on herself because she thinks that she basically thinks that she needs certain things, but what she wants is deep down is right in front of her. And they do such a good job of showing kind of what may have gotten her to that place and showing us and not just like sitting down with is
Axel.
it Axel?
I think it's Axel.
Axel and like telling him about her traumas. I feel like Sally, we don't really know what made her be kind of this very like particular person and have kind of all these quirks, but her age and societally it makes sense like why she's struggling with these things of like wanting love and wanting a relationship, because in a way, Michelle, like her saying I have it all figured out, the relationship piece, like she may feel very stable in the other pieces of her life, but I think she feels very unstable about the relationship piece, that she wants to be perceived that she has it all figured out and she's fine and she can be on her own, but she's not.
I think I agree kind of with what both you guys are saying, is like Sally and Julie in my mind are like totally not alike. Julie is an egoist. She's like very much wants what's best for herself, as if she's like the protagonist in a very large story that she's writing for herself. And I think it comes from comes from like a broken house that they show in the movie, right? And when Harry Met Sally, they don't show anything about their family life, where that's a pretty big part of the characters in Worst Person in the World, is Julie comes from a house that she was kind of didn't have a great relationship with either of her parents. So her whole life is like charting out what she wants for herself. Where Sally kind of seems like she comes from a house of love, a house where she's kind of gotten everything. But then when you come from like a house of love where you've had like a very cozy family growing up, you have this pressure from society to recreate that. And so a lot of When Harry Met Sally, I think, is both, that movie's more balanced between Harry and Sally. It's kind of two protagonists. I think Worst Person is pretty much solely about Julie's journey. But yeah, I think Sally, she's looking for like, hi, how do I recreate what I had in my childhood? And society, it seems like everyone else is doing fine. Like, why do I not have this like partner that I love more than anything that's like all roses and kisses? Where Julie, I think, is more concerned of like, how do I make the best possible life for the story I'm writing for myself? Which, again, Michelle, to your point, that's a lot more what Harry was like. Harry, for the most part, only really cares about himself. He's like probably an okay person, but he's like, he's more of an egoist. He's more of a centralist in his own story.
Do we want to just talk about what really worked and what we absolutely loved about these movies? Matt, I want to hear from you first.
What really resonates with me is you could feel the authenticity of one person writing these stories, right? It's not like a story being written by the screen to like make a good story. It feels like you're watching something that it is very authentic to the writer, right? The scenes that they take or the settings they take place in are real, right? Like when Harry Met Sally, they're at football games with like the crowd cheering, and he probably had a tough conversation in a very public place like that. They're at like an auto video store, like doing karaoke where he sees his ex. It's in a lot of movies that are like rom-coms or similar kind of movies, they're just like at a cafe. They're always at a cafe, or they're always at a restaurant, or they're always at a friend's house when any of these scenes are happening. In both of these movies, really prominent scenes are happening in really unexpected locations. The things that connect these characters are very strange, right? Like when she meets, who's the second guy? Jacob?
Ivan.
When she meets Ivan, it's like one of the greatest meetings of two characters in like film history, right? Like the conversations they have, it's like within the first hour of meeting each other, they're telling each other their strangest kinks and they're doing weird shit. And like, it's just very authentic. You don't have two characters in other movies. If they meet like that, it's because they're meeting during like a heist or something way over the top. Where this was just like a very like, oh, I met this person and we immediately felt comfortable to be vulnerable. When Harry Met Sally, as soon as they began this road trip, immediately they're like, I could tell you like some rough around the edges stuff about myself, or I could voice some hot takes on things. It's not as edgy as Worst Person, but it came, 30 or 40 years earlier. So the more you go into film, you forget about how important the actors are to like the success of a movie. You want to talk about the director, the writing, the shots. But like when you're a child and you watch movies, you're watching two actors act. And sometimes that gets forgotten when you're analyzing films. And with these two, especially in the older one, right? Billy Crystal and Meg Ryan, those are two of the most charismatic people of all time. And they're coming together. It's like anyone matched with Tom Hanks, they're going to have a funny movie, right? He's just so welcoming and charismatic, and they're both like that. And it's the same thing in the new one. Like the characters are so definitive. They're not as warm and charming as in When Harry Met Sally, but they're very unique, and they're know exactly who they're supposed to play. At its core, I think that's why both of these movies are so good, right? Like you're able to watch them and not see these characters as like actors. You see them as like fully fleshed out characters, and that's more than just a script.
I agree and somewhat disagree. I mean, I do think that all the actors are fantastic, but I think the thing that I love most about Worst Person in the World is how authentic it feels. It's shot so cinematically, so you would never think this, but it feels almost more like a reality show. Like they just like left a camera somewhere and you're just watching this girl go through life, which is I think the reason it hits so hard is because it felt so real. And in thinking about When Harry Met Sally, it also feels very authentic, but the movie is a lot more like polished and produced. But I do think, and this is the little part that I disagree with, I think that the writing is the thing that makes that movie so real. Even though everything is, all those words are like perfectly crafted and designed and made, into these like really witty jokes, there's so much truth in all of them. And I think that's just one of the things that attracts me to Nora Ephron's writing. I mean, I must have written down like 10 different, just really little, like random phrases. I'll give you an example. Like when Harry is telling Sally when they're on the airplane that he's getting married, he says, yeah, her name is Helen. And he said, I don't remember what her last name is, but he says her name is Helen, whatever. She's a lawyer. She's keeping her name. I just love that, like, all in one sentence, the like comma, she's keeping her name. Just like that little, that's like such a little Nora Ephron-ism. And I also love when Sally is talking about after she and Joe broke up. And one of the reasons that they broke up is that when they were talking about not having kids, that they would do all these things like fly to Europe on a whim or have sex on the kitchen floor. And he says like, oh, you never did any of those things. She's like, yeah. And she's like, it was a very cold, hard Mexican tile. I'm such a details person. So like, that's the kind of thought that I would have. And I love how much Nora Ephron expresses those really like inner detail thoughts. So I'd say the things that I love most about these movies are just that they both are very real, but they're done in like completely different ways.
As I've kind of put my like cinephile hat on more in the past couple years, set design has become so important to me when I'm watching a movie, and just paying attention to how it's crafted to be an extension, like another character in the room, or reflect the characters, especially apartments, like where people are living. You kind of like are getting like a subconscious view into who they are by setting the scene. They just do such a good job of that in Worst Person in the World, where, she moves in with Axel and and I think in the first like half hour, and just being able to kind of like see how they are merging who each of they are like in this apartment together and like building this life, I thought was such a beautiful aspect of it. But even just like the subtleties of them having the same book and like it being on the shelf, and innately who he is as a person is so like shown in where they live. And then seeing like the contrast of when she moves in with Ivan and like seeing their apartment, it's a lot darker, it's not as bright, and like, you know, having little details, but it's still kind of like warm and cozy. Like I know it's very detailed, but they do a good job with like showing the differences of even lighting in both of those settings. And I feel like in When Harry Met Sally, I love the New York of it all. I mean, it's very like Ephron, Rob Reiner esque. Just seeing them living in New York in their 20s and 30s, like going to a Yankees game, or having, Billy Crystal like going on his walk with Jess and like in the park. Like I just feel like the place of both of them works so well. But the writing, 100%, Michelle. I can't like, as I was rewatching Worst Person in the World, I think I want to rewatch it and have the script in front of me next time, because I think the authenticity of it is it's so rare to come by, when, to your point, it is a movie that just kind of feels like someone put a camera and we're getting like a sneak peek into someone's life. But it really feels so real and original. Like all the conversations they're having, it was really like thoughtful in every single like scene and conversation that they have. I mean, one of the obviously most prominent ones is when Axel and Julie break up, and just kind of like that whole string of mini scenes, like Matt was talking about, how they have like kind of these short and condensed scenes throughout, showing the different stages of a breakup, and like the anger, and then like the sadness and the love. But like all of the dialogue that was included in there, I can't even wrap my head around someone being able to sit down and write that when it's such heavy topics and it like hitting home so well.
So I work in like finance accounting, and one of the most difficult aspects of this job that people don't really think about is we basically take a lot of factors and complex information happening in a business, and we have to condense it down to a very concise sentence to say, this is what's happening. Julie says at one point, like, I feel like I never see anything fully through. I just go from one thing to another. And it's really like the thesis of she has commitment issues, right? And like I feel, when I imagine someone sitting down writing a script, they're not just going to pop that line out to perfectly describe someone. You know that she went through this whole dialogue, or the writer went through the whole dialogue saying, oh, I'm always here, and then I can't commit to something, and eventually whittled it down to these very precise conversations between characters, or even the narrator, or just saying things alone, that totally like relate to everyone, right? A lot of people feel that way, that they have commitment issues, and that can be summed up of, when I'm feeling uncomfortable at one thing, I just move on to the next thing that will make me happy.
Renee, what really struck me, I have never seen anything else that she's been in, but the dialogue is so wonderful. She delivers it so well, but she gives us so much just by her facial expressions. Like there are so many moments throughout this film that are silly, or, are a little bit fun, like getting peeks into the moments where she's happiest. But there's obviously a lot of like sadness, and it's like you just know exactly what's going through her head just by the way that she's looking at the camera. I mean, I could even go to the earlier chapters of when she's, goes on the first trip where she's meeting his friends for the first time. I think that's a really, honestly, relatable, probably experience for a lot of people. Like the first time you have to meet your partner's friends, and you're kind of like brought into this environment that's already been established, and you're the new person, and you have to like, kind of show yourself who you are, but you also are trying to be yourself and be authentic. And she's obviously like having difficulty with that because of the age gap mostly. And, there's kind of this more like tumultuous scene after they're dancing and having a good night. And one of the friends like hits her head on a lamp because she's, is finally like letting loose and having a good time, but she's older. And there's this part in the morning where Julie is just like has a cup of coffee, and she's standing outside on the lawn, and she's seeing the other couple who's older, and they're kind of like making up after a fight and kissing and looking lovingly. And then she's looking in the house and looking at Axel, drawing with the kids, and the whole, argument that they're having throughout this time is that, she's like, I don't want kids right now. I'm younger. I'm kind of at this part. And she's like, do you even want kids? He's like, yeah, of course I want to take like the next step with you. And she kind of like gets this glimpse of him in the house drawing with the kids. And she like kind of sees what could be, but she doesn't say anything. There's no dialogue. She's just kind of like looking out at all these things like around her and what other people are doing. And she kind of like sees what that stage that couple is in. You can tell like she doesn't really know what she wants. Like she could see that maybe that's supposed to be like what she's supposed to be going after. And like she sees that Axel is like a loving and kind person, but she's like not really sure still just by her facial expressions. So I just feel like that goes such a long way. You can have an incredible script, but if you don't have the right actors, the movie could be a complete flop. And I just thought that their Axel and Julie's chemistry was incredible between these two actors in the movie. And they just did a really good job of saying a lot with their faces.
The iconic scene in Worst Person in the World, this moment where she freezes time and runs through this scenario of what could be. And can you both remind me, that whole sequence is silent, right? Is there dialogue in it?
Yeah, there's not. Like as soon as she kind of flicks the switch and it pauses while Axel's pouring coffee, she's just running. So there's no dialogue. She's just kind of seeing all the people around her.
But the reason I brought all that up was to agree with your point that the actress who plays Julie is so good. And I don't know that just anyone could have made that scene as iconic as it ended up being, because without dialogue, she needed to say so much just in her actions and her expressions. And it's interesting that in both movies we get these scenes with people running. So she's running, and then we get Billy Crystal running at the end of When Harry Met Sally. But I think that there are a lot of movies in the same era as Harry Met Sally where there's like, especially in rom-coms, where someone's like, running through an airport, just running to like catch the other person like at the last moment. But I think it really speaks to modern filmmaking that, what is the filmmaker's name who did Worst Person in the World?
I think it's Joachim Trier.
Okay. Him, that guy. And so he took that trope of the person running and just did something completely different with it, and also put it in the middle of the movie and not at the end.
Both movies are about two characters who are totally afraid of commitment and have to go through all of these hoops to avoid being committed to someone they may be in love with. And in Harry Met Sally, it's very conventional that at the end of the movie, he's literally running to commitment. He's running to say, I want to spend now the rest of my life with you. I realize now, you find the woman you love, you want to spend you want the rest of your life to start right now. And then, but it's almost the opposite in Worst Person. Is she goes through all these stages in college where she's jumping from man to man to man to experience. She meets a guy, they settle down for 4 years, and then kind of at that midway point, she's having the opposite experience where she's like, I actually am not committed to this man, and I am doing anything. It would be like a dream of mine to run away from commitment, right? And that's really the core of Julie, is like she just runs away from things. She's always ready to try the next thing and not stick it through with the thing she's in now. And for her, it was meeting the other character, Ivan. I think as she met Ivan, she came into that relationship at the same energy and excitement and thrill as she came into Axel. And the same thing happened, right? She was with Ivan for a while, and then it starts to deteriorate. And when Harry Met Sally, they go through all these hoops that cause them to realize, oh, we're actually perfect together. Whereas in Worst Person in the World, like the true tragedy of it is when she goes through the same experience with Ivan, it takes that experience with him and really him criticizing, not being able to criticize her work, that she's like, wow, I really miss Axel. That is something that I ran away from for the first time in the whole movie or in her life. She's like, I wasn't committed to something that was truly good. And then when she returns, the tragedy is obviously that it's too late, right? And the person that she could have made a life with, he's coming towards the end of his life. I literally love every scene of both movies. If someone put a gun to my head and said choose one, I actually don't love that scene in Worst Person. If there's one scene that I think could go, is like the scene that I think a lot of other people feel anchors the movie and they relate to or they're wowed by. For me, like in every other scene, I feel like the director is very precise in what he's trying to express to us. And then in this scene, it felt to me more about the like wow factor of like, wow, I've never seen this before, which don't get me wrong, I like to see something I've never seen before and think about it. But as iconic as it is, on the other hand, like the iconic scene in When Harry Met Sally, everything built to that moment. The movie wouldn't be complete without that end scene.
I mean, I guess speaking of things we didn't like, Michelle, what did you not like about each of these movies?
Well, not to repeat myself, but I think for Worst Person, I didn't like having to face up to the feelings that it left me with. I think I was more sad for other people than I was for myself. I did not really relate to Julie as a character. So I wasn't feeling like, oh, I feel the same way. And like in making decisions or making decisions about relationships, it made me feel sad for anyone who has gone through an experience of not being satisfied that everything that they want is right there, but they're unable to see it. That makes like just that as a concept makes me incredibly sad.
I mean, even right there, I think that's a pretty profound thing for any film to do is to make you feel extremely strong of any emotion for a character that you don't relate to much at all. You know, to be able to like empathize with someone totally who's going through a totally different experience than you are. And I think that that is going to be like a universal aspect of Worst Person. Like, regardless where you're coming from or your experience, it invites you into that world very well. Right. So it makes it very easy to feel how they're feeling, even if you haven't gone through the breakup she's gone through or the changes she's going through, or the uncertainties or the childhood. It is unpleasant. Like it is a part of the movie to unlike, right? To feel that way after. It's also like so powerful that a movie could even do that.
There's the scene when she visits Axel in the hospital and they're having a conversation in the cafeteria. And I think it just speaks volumes to everything you just said, Michelle, where he is basically praising her and saying like how wonderful she is. She has like a lump in her throat. Like she can't say anything. And what she ends up saying is, this is really difficult for me because she can't accept that other people see her as a wonderful person, which is the complete opposite, obviously, of the title of the movie, which ties back to her commitment issues and so many things. So I feel the same, Michelle. It's so difficult to like watch someone in pain.
I have one very strong thing that I hate about When Harry Met Sally. Might ruffle some feathers with this. Because Matt kind of brought this up before we started recording. I hate the fashion in this movie. Hate it. Absolutely. Like,
and hair.
Just
hair specifically. That's actually what
it is like someone said, could you make this the least amount of aesthetically pleasing as you can? Like, take aesthetically pleasing and do the opposite.
I have like a very hot take about the fashion in When Harry Met Sally. So I think it's intentional that these are two characters who are standing in front of someone perfect for them and can't see that this person is like everything they're looking for. And that's represented through the outfits. Like their outfits, even for their time, are so goofy and over the top that like it's almost like how we as people, when you meet someone for the first time, you judge them on their outfits. And for some reason, they're viewing each other in that light of like, they view each other as almost like goofy or not compatible or not their perfect match for years. And I kind of always love that they wear these outfits that are so like unbecoming, whether it's in the direction of like, when they try to dress up, they look like cartoon characters. And when they try to dress down, they look like the biggest slob in the world. In my mind, that's always been like, oh, because they're looking at someone who's perfect for them. And that's just another aspect of like how blind they are, is like who they are beyond the outfits.
You're blowing my mind with this take because it also makes me think of like when they finally sleep together, Sally, I mean, not just because she's crying. That's like it's the worst that it's her worst look of all the terrible looks. Like that the hair, I don't like why would anyone ever do that to their hair? She's a beautiful woman and they're like making her look as ugly as possible.
All right, new side topic. The side characters. You would argue that Axel and Julie are like the two leads of Worst Person. Then you have Ivan, who has a serious side time. But then there's really not many other side characters in Worst Person. But then in When Harry Met Sally, it's
Jess and
Jessa Marie,
Marie.
yeah.
and like they are such a huge part of the movie as well. And I'm interested in like the takes of the side characters, like what one really I think needed them. I think When Harry Met Sally wouldn't have been as balanced without the scenes with side characters. Where Worst Person probably could have been close to as successful of a movie if there was never even the Ivan story and it was just something else.
I have a couple thoughts. For Harry Met Sally, I think that agree they definitely needed those kind of their counsel and people to lean on and bounce things off of. I think it helps us a lot throughout the movie and but also provides even more comedic relief. I think Carrie Fisher is amazing in this movie. She is so funny. I love that she's such like she's a little bit complex. Like in the beginning we meet her and she's sleeping with a married man and everyone's like he's never gonna leave you. Like you gotta get over it. He'll never leave you. She pulls out, the beginning scene, she pulls out the phone book and trying to get Meg Ryan a date a minute after she's out of a 5-year relationship. And I think she's just funny and witty and great. And I think Jess is her perfect match for playing that same role just on the other side. If they had been different actors, I don't think it would have stood out as much for me because if the acting wasn't as great or they picked someone else, I don't think that it would have landed as well. But I still think that role is needed.
Two of my absolute favorite scenes from When Harry Met Sally are with specifically those two. Like the one that I always laugh out loud at is when Carrie Fisher and Meg Ryan are at the bookstore and Carrie Fisher's like, a man is staring at you from personal growth is like the most probably my favorite line maybe in the whole movie. There's a man staring at you from personal growth. And then the first date with her and Bruno Kirby when they're kind of like obviously there's like they're set up with each other and then they find each other and like enjoy the conversation with the two other dates more. But like at the very end of that when they're like that very quippy scene when they're getting in the taxi and they're like, oh, I don't know, I might go home. Oh, where are you heading? Uptown, me too, let's go. And they both just run into the cab as fast as possible. And I don't have side characters in other movies that have like what I consider the funniest parts of the movie itself.
Bruno Kirby does a great job in that role. But I think for Worst Person in the World, I think that the actor who plays Ivan is great for that character. But I disagree with you. I actually think that that character that's written into the movie is important. And I don't think I could really see it without it because he kind of gives us a glimpse into Julie like needing to be a little bit more spontaneous and go off on her own and do all these things. And he's actually the opposite of Axel where he doesn't challenge her and he's just kind of like a sweet person who cares about her and wants to start a life. But like he doesn't, I mean, there's a really like tense scene where they're at the kitchen table and she basically is like, what do you want to serve coffee for until you're 50? Like, and you're happy with that? And he says, oh, like, I don't know what to say. I'm so hurt by what you said. It's less of giving us enjoyment for the movie as I think Carrie Fisher and Bruno give us. And it's more so important for Julie's journey and the story for him to be in there.
I agree with Laura. I don't think Worst Person would have worked as well without Ivan in it. But I want to talk about all of the little characters in Worst Person. It makes me think of there's this line in Ocean's 11 where Brad Pitt's character is talking to Matt Damon's character and he's kind of coaching him on how he has to act when he's like pretending to be this guy, and he says he has to like you and then like forget who you are like the second that you leave. And I feel like that's every other like side character in Worst Person. I would say maybe with the exception of Ivan's like, girlfriend who becomes his ex-girlfriend because she's very much like a caricature kind of character. But everyone else were really good in their scene and serve their purpose, and then like you just completely forget about them, which I think for that kind of movie and a movie where the two main characters are so central to the plot. We talk about this like a ton on this podcast about how you need to have like the quiet moments so that the big moments stand out. And I think in Worst Person, all the little side characters need to kind of be like extra insignificant to draw attention to how important Julie's story is. Matt already kind of got us kicked off with favorite scene, but Matt, do you want to submit like another official favorite scene? Or
I think
okay,
so.
You guys go yours and I'll think of mine.
So I'm going to start with Worst Person. Again, I'm a difficult one because I love this whole movie, but I really like kind of montage, which I guess could be considered a couple of different scenes of when her and Axel start dating, and she moves into his apartment and they're just kind of like settling in and getting cozy with each other. And there's a scene where she's like trying to like close the window and it's getting stuck and he's just being like having his weird tendencies, and we just get a glimpse into like who they are. I'm going to submit a second one just because I feel like it works so well, but I love the chapter when they go away to the cabin because I'm putting on like my writer's hat and finding symbolism, but just the idea of them being stuck in like this claustrophobic room together and having such an intense conversation about like wanting to have kids. Like it's almost like they took that setting and like put it like created it physically of like how she's probably feeling. Like she's feeling suffocated. They're in this freaking bunk bedroom. And I just love like all the shots, honestly, within that scene where they're going to bed together and like the couple is fighting through the wall and they're just having this like tender conversation laying in bed together. And for When Harry Met Sally, where Jess and Marie move into their apartment and they're like, you don't like my coffee table. Yeah. I just think that conversation is really funny, and Harry's really wound up because he had just seen Helen. But specifically when Sally and Harry like leave and go outside and are having this conversation because he's upset, and Jess comes outside with not the table, but just the wheel inside the table and brings it outside, and he just goes, "Don't say anything."
Should I go?
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Okay, for Worst Person, I also really like the cabin scene because it is exactly what I have experienced in situations like that, where you're going on a trip and you're really looking forward to it, and all the people there are great, and you have it in your head that like this is going to be this like great time, and everyone's supposed to have a great time, and everyone is having a great time. But there's always something that goes wrong and you get really uncomfortable. And Laura, you described it perfectly in that scene where like they're having this like really important conversation. Like all it takes is like a couple drinks for like a conversation like that to take place, and they can't even have it because they're in this like weird position. They're not in their own house. There's so many things in that movie that feel realistic, but to me, of all the scenes, that whole like chapter felt like something that I have experienced before.
Yeah. Shot specifically of the cabin that they're staying in is so beautiful. They do this one shot of when they're dancing inside and he's outside of the house and it's nighttime and you're seeing them dancing inside the house. And then again, we're looking through that same window that I had mentioned earlier of like in the morning when Axel's like drawing with the kids. And it's just so beautiful. I know there's other filmmakers who do equally as beautiful of a job, but Nothing's really hit as well for me as those ones.
It is really lovely. And When Harry Met Sally, I love the first karaoke scene where they're singing Surrey with the Fringe on Top, but I also love the things that come after it. One of my favorite lines is when Billy Crystal like has this explosion. He says the line about like, and then you're singing "Sir with the French on Top" in front of Ira. Like just the fact that his name is Ira, that he just met him, but he's obviously like he's not stopped thinking about this guy is brilliant.
That's totally your humor, Michelle.
Yeah. And then the fact that like somehow, even though there was this bad situation when they were playing with the machine in the store, he either already owned one or did end up going back to buy it, because then there's a scene where he's trying to get Sally to talk to him after they've gotten in a fight, and then he calls her and he's singing the song "Call Me" like on his karaoke machine.
These movies are very well known for like they're absolutely colossal, like famous scenes. And in the deli, the final scene in When Harry Met Sally, the freezing time scene in Worst Person in the World, right? They are iconic, especially with Worst Person in the World being so new and so many people knowing of that scene. It's like pretty special. So of course, like the end scene in When Harry Met Sally is like when everything culminates at that, it's like the perfect feeling. But I think for me in that movie, what draws me in so much is the beginning 10 minutes. The whole road trip to New York, it's a series of scenes, but it's like the most captivating conversation I think I've ever watched, of them just kind of calling each other out, like kind of like immediately being vulnerably mean with each other, like being comfortable being just like cranky and mean and disagreeing. And like most people, it takes a really long time to be able to say like, no, I think you're wrong, or like that's ridiculous that you feel that way. And for two people, like that's really what ties them together, is they're like kvetching about society and norms, and it's kind of like a Larry David-esque kind of attitude. And they just immediately have that with each other. I mean, as soon as I put on When Harry Met Sally, I kind of get into a cozy mode within 2 or 3 minutes. I'm like, yeah, this is going to be a great ride. And it is. Worst Person in the World, I think, is a little bit harder to choose a favorite scene because it's really just a collection of moments. And there's so many that stand out, like the scene when she first meets Ivan and they are at a party and have like the weirdest experience meeting each other, and they're in the bathroom. It's just like everyone in the theater is like, what am I watching on screen right now? But I think if I were to choose two, is her beginning narration when the narrator's talking over like her experience in college, and you think you're meeting kind of like an Amelie. In Amelie, they do the same thing, and they're like, this is exactly who Amelie is. And so you are sitting there as an audience thinking, okay, this is Julie. She's totally uptight. She wants to become like a medical student. Like we totally believe it. It's very definitive, objective. This is what she's going to become. And then right off the bat, he's like, and then she like smelled wine and she wanted to do something else. And then she like the wind blew and she wanted to become an artist. That montage, specifically in the beginning, that kind of talks about the whole story of how she can't commit to anything, is just a perfect way in my mind to start a movie. I'm almost as invested as she is in every one of these little hobbies she's picking up. And then she switches abruptly, and I'm as invested as she is in the new one. Like, I think they do such a good job with that. And then to contrast that, at the end, when she brings Axel to his like childhood home, and he brings her to like the 3 little stained glasses that are like red, yellow, and blue. And he's basically, the paraphrase is saying like, this is something that is extremely meaningful to me on Earth that I don't think anyone else has ever even seen. This is something that is only important to me. This is a random ass stained glass that when I was a little boy, I would look into this thing, and it was like, it totally inspired my view of colors. I became like, he didn't say all this in the movies, but he like portrayed this, that he became like an artist, right? He's an artist who masters colors. And then he brings her to his childhood, and he says like, here's a stained glass of red, blue, and yellow, right? An inception core part of who he is. And he's sharing that with her at like the end of his life. A really, truly core memory experience for him to share with the only person he feels he's ever connected with in his life. And there's so many ways they could have gone about saying like, you are the only, and they do actually think, I think they say it in the dialogue, you are the only person I've ever connected with in my life. But to me, showing it was saying like, here's something that only you and me will ever know about me. I don't even know if I thought about it that much in the movie, but I just remember how slow it was. Like after this, worst person's very fast and it moves quickly and things change quickly. But that scene was like so intentionally slow and still.
That's the kind of scene that like you want to experience something like that in life. Like you want to share a moment like that with someone.
They actually shoot through the camera through the stained glass in each of the colors, and it's like kind of shows like how everyone's outlook on each other and life is different, or like through stained glass. And there's actually a lot of like, I'm always the first person to like go after symbolism or why directors decided to include things whether or not it's subconscious. Looking at things like through like kind of glass, you could see yourself, you see a reflection, but kind of like seeing through it and what's on the other side. And it's almost like a lot of people may feel like they're kind of like trapped in this glass box where they like see what's through it or see to the other side, but like they may not be able to get there for certain reasons. And I just feel like he like does that throughout the movie. It's so intentional. I'm gonna jump in and say my favorite line from When Harry Met Sally. I know we've been talking about a couple throughout, but back to kind of including funny names. But when Billy Crystal is talking about how he was like, "Who have you slept with?" and she says this guy named Sheldon, and he's like, "No." Like he's like, you can't be in love with a guy named Sheldon. He's like, Sheldon does your taxes. That I feel like I'm constantly doing that. If someone's like name doesn't match who they are, I'm like, no. And for worst person in the world, it's not so much about like favorite, like things that made me laugh, but I think the line is so strong, which I think that they actually use in the trailer, which works like just so well in explaining exactly who Julie is. But I think that breakup scene is so strong. So I'm going to use two that actually each of them say. And one of them she says is like I love you and I don't at the same time. And I'm like, oh my God, geez, it's like really like cuts deep and just like explains like everything she's struggling with in that moment. And then he's like kind of on the other side, which Matt had brought up earlier, where he's saying like, you're never going to have a love like ours. And I know it's a little bit mansplaining. I think it could be taken in the wrong context, but he's saying like, I'm older than you. Trust me. Like I've been in multiple relationships. I know how this goes. And he says it in he writes it in a much more eloquent way for Axel to deliver it. But
yeah, and then in the very end,
person,
he was right.
I know.
Right, the tragedy. There's so much tragedy about worst person that, like he was, and that's kind of in life too, right? Like the people you kind of let leave your life might be the most important people, but you just don't know until you've gone through more experiences, and you have to go through those experiences like she did. Like you have to learn the other side, or you have to. It's like a very common theme in everyone's life. You have to like try something before you know how much you miss something else. You have to leave home before you can move back. He has a line that's like, the things that I worried about most my whole life were never the things that went wrong.
Yes.
And that one hit
me.
Me. Like, especially once, the end, he gets cancer. Like he had all these problems and issues and worries, and it's not until he has this like profound life or death problem that he's like, why did I even like waste all my time worrying about all this crap? Yeah, just think of best lines. Like that one definitely resonated with me.
We didn't really talk very much about the vignettes of all the like the little couples in When Harry Met Sally, and I feel like while I don't feel like super strongly about the fact that needs to like be in the movie or that it really like adds a ton to it. I think that there's some really good writing in there. And two of the lines that I wrote down from those scenes, the woman who says that she's talking about like her friend Maxine, and she says people were always crossing rooms to talk to Maxine. And I was just like, to be able to like describe a person in one line so eloquently. I loved that. And the other one that I thought was really cute was that I wrote up 9 extra floors just to keep talking to her. I want to put that on a Valentine. The listeners may have gathered this at some point that Worst Person is a Norwegian film. So it is a different experience, as we talked about, kind of like watching it and reading the subtitles. But Laura, I think you brought up this line earlier when Axel like says like, I think that you're like a wonderful person or something along
He
those
says you're
lines.
a damn good
You're a
person.
damn good person. Like, it's simple, but I think that that would probably have to be my favorite line. And if I also may like bring it back over to When Harry Met Sally, there are two lines that I wrote down that Harry says that just really make me like that sort of person who is so comfortable enough to be able to just like say a line like this without having to like make it mean more than it is. So one he says at the beginning when he says in like that first scene where they're at the diner and he's just like looking at her and he's like, "You're a very attractive person." And like, why can't people like just say that if that's the case? And she gets like so like, offended by it. But I totally like understand what he's saying. Like, no, it's just like it's a statement of the facts. But then at the end, I like that he says to her, when we first met, I didn't like you very much, which is like such a nice bookend to his character, that he's still the same character, and he's reflecting on in that very same scene where he was saying to her like, I think that you're attractive, he was also thinking, I don't really like you. And both of those things could be true at the same time.
We need to do our final segment because Matt's like, I'm starving.
Warning, I have a
Do you have
10
to
minute, my battery's like about to die.
Oh,
So
shit.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Go and I just,
Okay,
oops,
we'll be
that's
quick.
what happened.
Rapid fire. So for this food section of this mini series that we're doing, we're going to talk a little bit about what this movie made us want to eat, but also we're each going to pick a character, and the three of us are going to come up with like we're taking them out on a date. Like, what are we?
We're planning the date, yeah.
These people. So for me, worst person in the world didn't really make me want to eat anything. It made me want to probably guzzle a bottle of wine or have a cup of coffee or tea or be cozy. And definitely diner food for When Harry Met Sally. Like, I just want a big old pastrami sandwich. And when she's talking about pie a la mode, that's what I want.
Oh yeah, yeah. When Harry Met Sally, it's like that diner food, but also like it's a Thanksgiving dinner for me every time. It's so autumn. Like that movie goes through all the seasons and ends with New Year's, but it's so autumn for me. Like the scene when they're walking through the park and it's like the foliage is definitely the imprinted memory on my mind. In my mind, the whole movie takes place in autumn, actually. Like, so it's definitely like some turkey and cranberries and like sweater weather and
Ooh.
it's like late fall, just a big cozy warm meal with friends, and like the diner, like obviously a pastrami sandwich, and then yeah, for worst person in the world, it's like not a food movie whatsoever.
I don't think they eat at all.
Yeah, it's like a cold sandwich from a Starbucks is like the vibe of the movie.
From what I remember from Worst Person in the World, like makes you want to smoke some cigarettes and drink a cold glass of like a white wine that you've never heard of before. The smoking, the drinking, the like maybe the fact that like we don't see her eating a lot means that she's not getting like the substance that she needs to like to think and see clearly. And then yeah, I mean, not to be basic, but diner food for Harry Met Sally. I specifically wrote down those Dr. Brown sodas.
Oh yeah, cream sodas.
Yeah, those. And even though we don't see her or anyone really eating like chicken salad or tuna salad, like that's the kind of sandwich that movie left me wanting.
That's what you said for
I know for You've Got Mail,
too.
but she does eat it in that one.
She does.
I just have an association with Meg Ryan and chicken salad sandwiches, I guess.
Oh,
We lost him.
we were so close. Okay, you and I.
All right.
We got it.
We can do this.
So I'm going to pick someone and you pick someone.
Okay.
And they're going on a date. I think that we should do when Harry and Axel are going to go on a date together.
Okay. I like this. Oh, this is interesting energy
This
between these two guys.
I think that they're going to have dinner like at a cafe because I feel like there's a lot of like coffee shop scenes in When Harry Met Sally and also in Worst Person.
Yeah. So I feel like it has to be the kind of cafe that like they will recommend to other people, but no one else has heard of it. Like a little like hidden gem that the two of them discovered, maybe together.
I feel like it's Axel like in New York visiting him, and Harry's like, I know this like little cafe we can go to. It's like in the West Village,
Yeah,
and not that many
definitely.
people know it. And it's like under one of those, you have to like walk down steps to get there.
Hmm.
So it's a little bit hidden.
Should we come
But
up with like a prefix menu for them?
yeah, I mean they're going out on Valentine's Day, every restaurant. So even this cafe is gonna have a prefix menu. Having some type of like tomato soup as like a starter. So having something that's like warm, but like a bisque. So
Okay.
maybe like a tomato bisque soup with like a crusty bread on the side. What do we think? As like one of the first things they're served.
I like this. I like this because I feel like I could see Billy Crystal using that experience to like have commentary about the soup while Axel's just trying to like enjoy it and take in the atmosphere.
And we need a little bit of, we need some pops of red in there for him.
Yes,
So you know he would be
that's right.
really
The red color.
intrigued by the colors.
I have a
Yeah.
random submission for this because I've had these in two different places recently. Croquettes. Oh, and Izzy,
Ooh.
our niece, made these in her cooking class
Okay.
on the same day that I had it, coincidentally.
Okay. I actually have two thoughts before I forget. One, the first time, one of the first Valentine's Day Dom and I spent together, we went out to this like tapas restaurant. I think it was actually in West Village, and they had croquettes on the menu and they were really good. But I've been really craving like arancini, like fried rice balls. So I feel like just having like that would be a really nice follow up from, I know it's like a heavy soup, but then having like kind of like another like rich, like potato filled little
Yeah.
bite. And they each just get one.
Yeah, you need something of like
Yeah.
substance to like go with because tomato soup, I mean, I know it's creamy, but it's also like there's not stuff in it, so they need something to like chew.
Yes. Ooh, that sounds good. Is there meat in them? Or are we just
There
doing
can
like
be.
straight? Okay.
I had one with like sausage in it. That was good.
Like a ground pork or
Yeah,
something
yep.
in here. I also feel like Axel is
Is
a
he a vegetarian?
vegetarian. I feel
Oh.
like he's
Okay,
vegetarian. And I
so
feel like
let's
he
axe
likes
the
mushrooms.
okay, let's take them we're gonna not serve sausage
No, this is what I'm
croquettes.
thinking. I think that they are sausage croquettes, and Axel's the type of person who's like, "Can you just not include the meat?" And they're like, "Well, they're kind of pre-made, but okay." And Billy Crystal or Harry is like, "Are you kidding? Like, you don't eat meat? Like, this is a meat stuffed croquette." So because it's Valentine's Day and, this is a prefix menu, but the waitress is kind of stressed, they're going to give them one of each. So it's okay. We can have some meat in there. You know that
Okay.
Harry would be pissed if he's
Yeah,
like,
he would.
I'm not eating.
All right, so what's going to be the main then now that we have this information? We have a I'm sure they have a vegetarian option for a prefix on Valentine's
Fair.
Day.
I'm definitely more on like the creamy train because I'm thinking of just like cold weather. But I feel like for Axel, like I want to make him something with like, what is that type of mushroom that's like, I think it's called like chanterelles, but they're a little bit like, they have like a really nice texture to them, in like a cream sauce, maybe like
Mm.
that over a parpadale or like a tagliatelle, like
Oh,
like a
yeah, yeah.
mushroom cream pasta. I feel like he would like that.
He would love that. And I think
It also,
Harry would eat
this
that.
is really weird, but this guy actually is like another famous couple of movies history. But in the first Twilight movie, when Edward brings Bella out on a date, he like buys her like mushroom pasta. And it's kind of like a intense scene. He's like, she's vegetarian, so I gotta get my woman some mushrooms. So I guess Harry's getting his man some good mushroom pasta.
I also feel like that's a great dish. Another one for Harry to be able to talk about because I feel like if it was like tagliatelle, he'd be like tagliatelle, like he would keep repeating the word.
All right, what do you think Harry's getting? I feel like I already know the answer to this, but
I'm just thinking like the most basic, like whatever is closest to like a meat and potatoes kind of combo. What were you thinking? Something with like a baked potato, even though we already had them possibly in the
I
croquettes.
feel like he is not at all adventurous. I feel like he would genuinely just be like, I really want a burger right now. Like, and
Yeah, yeah.
can I get it cheaper? Like that's what I'm saying. And maybe that's not what we're serving him because they're gonna be like, sir, this is a Valentine's Day prefix menu. Like, we're not serving a cheeseburger. This is not, even though it's a little bit of an incognito cafe. I honestly am thinking that which we have used this on countless episodes, but I feel like he's getting either skirt steak or prime rib with
Yeah, I was
like,
thinking prime rib. Yeah.
and like it's served with chimichurri sauce, and he's like, "What
Yeah.
the hell is a chimichurri? Like,
Yeah.
I'm not having this." So maybe like just like just like a really like red meat.
And Axel is going to
I
be
don't know if
secretly grossed out
yeah, he's
by
gonna be like,
seeing
"I'm
the
sorry,
blood.
he may leave in the middle of the date because he's like, I cannot be eating meat right now. He's like, what if I could, because Axel's kind of a difficult person. Like, he may be like, listen, I can't even see red meat because it grosses me out, or else I will have to leave. Like, would you be open to maybe getting a fish instead? And be like, and Harry's like beside himself. Like, he's not liking the black cod dish that's on the menu. So I don't know. Feels like a really tumultuous Valentine's
I
Day
don't
date.
think there's going to be a second date for these two.
What do we think they're drinking?
Oh, I could see Harry just ordering a Coke.
I could see him ordering like a beer, like an Allagash,
Yeah,
or just
maybe. Yeah.
like a Bud Light.
Yeah. He like does not see the like he doesn't even like consider that wine
No,
might be an option.
no. And I feel like Axel's like, I actually want one of
The
your like an
the
expensive
list.
bottle
Yeah.
of red wine. Yeah. And he's like doesn't care about costs because he's got that comic book money.
Yeah.
So like, and he's like, you're not drinking wine, and he gets the bottle anyway, and he
Like
corks it and brings it home.
like he gets it for the table like not believing that Harry won't drink it, but then like he refuses to. He's not
Yes.
interested.
And they
Yeah.
like bring out two glasses, and Harry's like, oh no, I'm not having wine. Like, just one. And like them needing to have that awkward interaction.
In along with these lines, we know that Harry doesn't like desserts because they established that in the movie. But I feel like with prefix that the dessert is included. So I feel like even though Axel like wants to get out of there, he's still gonna stick around for the dessert because he wants it. I am seeing like a creme brulee.
That's exactly what I was gonna say. But I know that's like the most classic, probably Valentine's Day dessert.
And
But I feel like it has one of those like strawberries on top.
I feel
And
like Axel's gonna like eat it, and Harry's gonna sit across the table from him and just punch through what is it, like not the glaze, it's
yeah,
the
it's like
caramelized sugar on
yeah.
top, and just like stab it with his knife and just make a
Yes.
mess, but not actually eat it.
Yeah. And Axel's gonna be upset. And
Yeah.
then he's like, I'll just pay for this whole dinner because
And
I
take
gotta
his
get out of
wine.
here.
Yeah.
Let me just cork my wine and get out of here and go back to Oslo. I'm done with the West Village.
What an
Oh,
awful but fantastic date.
fantastic. I mean, it makes for a good story.
It
Like
does.
Harry's calling Jess after and being like interrupting him and Marie's like candlelit dinner at their chic home. We're, for our listeners, this is our mini season, so we're doing a little different style of our dinner party, but I'm happy we tested it out for this one because I think this is one of my favorite ones we've done so far.
And not a stalk of broccoli to be found. So I'd say it
Not
was
a
successful.
stalk. Not even a roasted chicken in there either. Okay, so next week, make sure you tune in. We're going to be doing another matchup. Definitely will not be unfamiliar territory for our listeners. We're going to be doing another Nancy Meyers film. It's complicated. And Michelle, which movie are we matching it up with?
We're going to be pairing it with the original Audrey Hepburn Sabrina.
Love. So make sure you listen in.